Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. So this is the 10th session in the series. Thank you, Michelle, for presenting this session today. So Michelle is going to cover some of the functions in the SSJS and the try catch and send functions and the query definition functions along with the data extension functions. So I thank everyone for joining and also continuing your journey towards learning SSJS. I really appreciate and I see a lot of participation as well. So continue the spirit, continue the learning journey. And if you have missed any of the previous sessions, they are all available on the YouTube. And we only have the presentations available for some of the sessions. So I have uploaded and linked them in the descriptions, whatever is available. We have 2 more sessions, and tomorrow we have the hands-on session at 8 a.m. Eastern. And the next 2 sessions that are scheduled on Wednesdays, 12 p.m. So the hands-on sessions will run at 8 a.m. and the regular sessions will run at 12 p.m. So make sure you register to the next 2 sessions as well. And any questions that you have, please post them in the chat window and we can answer them at the end of the session. And if you have any feedback or any other sessions that you want to see, please post them in the chat. And any other questions post this session, you can post them on the Slack channel. I hope you're all part of the Slack channel. If not, let me know and I will send the link. I think that is all, Michelle. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights. So I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, JB. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our day 10 of our SSJS Bootcamp. I'm Michelle Medina, so I am a senior Salesforce consultant at Cervelo. So I specialize in marketing cloud and marketing automation, and I'm excited to have this session with you today. So let's get started. Let me just go next. All right. So like I said, we'll be discussing a few different SSJS functions. So we'll go through the data extension, the try catch, send query, the send function, and the query definition as well. So like I said, we're going to walk through these functions, but I actually want to walk through the data extension functions and the try catch, then actually jump straight into the marketing cloud platform to, start using some of those functions hands-on, and then we can jump back to the deck to walk through a few more of these functions. All right, so let's get started here. So the data extension function. So the data extension functions allow access to the fields and rows that are contained within a data extension. So, as we've mentioned in previous sessions, we have to initialize the object first, but the add function creates a new data extension and returns an initialized data extension object. So you'll see here I've included some sample code snippets as well to see what that would look like. Something else actually that I want to mention is that the Salesforce developer documentation is great. They have examples, they have what the syntax and function properties should be. So it's a great way to get started if you're new to SSJS. So if we're looking at the fields function, or it's actually a sub object. So that allows you to interact with fields and use the associated functions like add and retrieve, and you can use that within the data extension. So the retrieve function retrieves an array of data extension objects based on the specified criteria. And the rows function is also a sub object. So that allows you to interact with the rows of a data extension, also with associated functions. So there's, the rows add, rows lookup, rows update, remove, and retrieve. So here are 2 examples. So the first one is the rows lookup, and that returns the column that match the specified values. And then the rows update will update the specified row within the specified information here. So that's another example that you'll see here as well. So if we go on to the try catch. So the try catch statements, they're a great way to detect and handle, any code errors in Cloud Pages. So, as powerful and amazing as SSJS can be in Cloud Pages, it could be a bit tedious, a little more challenging trying to hunt down any of those SSJS code errors. So that's where the try and catch statements can come in, right? So the try statement identifies a block of code to watch for errors while it's being run. And then the catch statement works like an if statement. So it only runs the condition if there's an error in the try section. So if there's an error in the try section, so if that's true, it'll run. So there's also, in this example here in the code snippet here, you can see that there's a variable error, and that's where the exception message, essentially explaining why the error occurred will be stored or, displayed. So here, essentially, as you'll see within the platform and as we walk through the demo, it'll be displayed. So before we jump into Marketing Cloud, I just kind of wanted to describe and set the tone of the use case that we'll be looking at today and how we'll be building a multi-form page using SSJS. So Sorello Bank is, looking to conduct a fit assessment for their new retirement services to companies. So there are multiple form pages that a potential client needs to fill in. So based on their answer for company size, they'll have to be asked different additional questions. So what we're looking to do today is build a multi-form page that will store data in our data extension, redirect them to a different form based on certain criteria, and also give them the ability to pick up where they left off if, once they get redirected to that second form, which would have these additional questions, right? So let's actually jump into the platform. Get out here. Let me move. All right. So I wanted to start with what we'll be working with today. So we just have a test email here. And the way this is, the end-to-end solution would be, so a customer receives an email, and this call to action button is actually going to direct them to the form to start filling out those questions that Sorello Bank needs answered. So we're going to be working with this test email, and we're also, sorry, the Zoom controls are in my way. Let me do this, then get through here. Oh, I just reclosed that. Sorry about that. I just closed that tab by mistake. Let me reopen that. All right. Let me share my screen again. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to, all right, so we have the email. Let me get that email here. Go hands-on. Let me open this again. All right, so like I mentioned, we have this email that we'll be using this call to action will redirect them to the cloud page that we need. Then we can go to our data extension. So our data extension will have just simple fields right now that we're capturing. So we're capturing our first name, last name, email, the company size, country, if the company is public or private. And then we have a step that will be a hidden field that I'll talk about in a bit. So let's actually now jump to the cloud pages. So we'll actually have 3 cloud pages. So we're working with this. This is again, for demo purposes. So this is a very simple form that we're using down here, and this will be the front end form. And this is where our code snippet where we're actually going to be adding our SSJS. This debug and errors is essentially just for, our own troubleshooting and debugging any errors that we may see throughout where we built, but just wanted to give you what this form would look like. And as you can see, this is the sign up step 1. So let me show you what the other 2 forms would look like with what we're working with. So then we have like I mentioned, if depending on the company size answer, so if it's, below 500, we're going to want to redirect them to the small form, right? So the step 2 small form, and this will have an additional question. And then similar with our large company, you'll see we have our large, and then we would actually want to ask them another additional question on company type. So let's actually start building now. So let's go back to our first form. All right, so we are using a front-end HTML form, and the difference between this front-end form versus a smart capture form, it's, when we submit this form, we're essentially submitting to the same page. So when you click on submit, it'll send a post request to the same page. So the logic on the page is going to determine if this is, the first fresh load of the page, or if someone just submitted the form and it's loaded again. So what the logic is going to do, which what we're going to build, is, whenever the page loads, we're going to check if the user already has data in the data extension. And if they do, we'll redirect them appropriately if necessary. And then 2 functions are going to be very useful here. So we are going to be using the get value function and also the get form field function. So the get value function is what we'll be using to get the primary key. So essentially, our key identifier in this use case, we'll be using email address. And the other function, the get form field function, is we're going to use that to get the fields that we actually want to add, the field values that we actually want to add to the data extension. So once we get all of those values, and then we'll be able to use the data extension functions to actually insert data into the data extension. So like I mentioned previously, and maybe I can zoom in a little bit here to make this a little visible. So as I mentioned previously, to interact with the data extension, we first have to initialize the object. So that's what you're seeing here on line 13. So we've been declared our variable and we've initialized the object. And right above that, we're seeing a few more variables, right? So we're seeing the sub email, which is, we're getting the value of, our key identifier, which is what I mentioned. We're using the email address. And then we're also declaring our data extension. So this is the data extension name that we're using. And that's where we're going to be sending our data to. Then you also see that I've set some other variables here, like a small company URL, large company redirect URL. These variables will come into play later on this build, but so I'll definitely explain them. But yeah, let's get started. So the first thing we need to know is, what I mentioned earlier is we need to know if the form was just submitted, or if it was a fresh load. So if it was a fresh load, in that case, the SSJS shouldn't do anything. So to differentiate between those 2 loads, let's go back to the form. Actually, wanted to show you this here. So if we look on line 7, right, we have a hidden element with the hidden input type of submitted, right? So that value is only going to be populated when someone submits the form. So when there's a fresh load, there's not going to be a form submission, so that value shouldn't exist. So if we go back to where we're going to begin our SSJS code here, we want to first get that submitted value, right? So we want to get the actual submitted value, which is what you're seeing here on line 14. So that is, we created our variable submitted, and with the platform.request.getForm field, we are getting that submitted value. So let's see if this submission is properly working with our variable set value function. So if this is a good way to, debug or ensure that your logic is working properly as you're building as well. So what we're going to do is actually, just to save us some time too, I have some of this written, and I'll just copy and paste it just to save us a few more minutes. And then, so what we're doing here is we're setting the debug variable as submitted. So what we expect to see, let's save and publish. So what we expect to see on the first load is nothing really, because again, that submitted value should not exist yet. After we hit submit and the page is reloading, then we should see, some sort of, it's true value. So the submitted value, right? So let's actually try that out and make sure this logic, at least right now, we are able to get that submitted. All right, so let me click on the cloud page. As you see on the first fresh load, we're not seeing any value in our debug block, right? So if I were to just click submit, we're expecting to see that submitted value, right? So this identifies that this submission logic is working. So now that we know how to decide whether or not our logic for submit versus non-submit, we're going to use, let me just jump back to the cloud page. So now that we have that set, we are going to use an if condition in SSJS to essentially only execute our logic once the form has been submitted, and then execute a different logic if it's a fresh load. So if it's the first load, we have to check the data extension. If the data already exists, then redirect if necessary. That's the code that will execute if submitted is empty. And if the variable submitted is, true, if equal to submitted, then we need to write the code to actually populate the data extension and then redirect them to the appropriate next step. So we can start working on these blocks of code. So like I said, we're going to begin with an if condition. And let me just paste that in so we can save us some time here. So essentially what we're doing here. So if submitted is equal to the value submitted, right? And then our curly and bracelets to denote the block. And then we also have our else statement. So we can start actually writing our logic in, these two sections now that we have a clear place to start writing our logic. So within our if block, we want to write SSJS that will submit our data to the data extension and then redirect the users. In the else block, we're going to check if the user already submitted the data and then redirect them without giving them the ability to write in the form. So this happens because anything that happens in this else block, it's happening before the form is even loaded for the user. So it's happening on the server side. So let's start building. Let's start with the first scenario. So since we wouldn't have any data, right? So we can use the rows add sub-object to start inserting data into our data extension. So if we take a look at the developer documentation, so we can, like I said, it's great way to get the proper syntax here. Let me go here. So I'm sorry, the Zoom controls are not moving out of my way, so it's probably the easiest way to see here. All right. So like I've said, we're going to be using this rows add function to insert the data. If we take a look right here, we'll see the syntax, the function properties. And if we look down further at this sample code, we've already initialized our object. So that was one of our variables that we declared. So all we really need to do is add the data. So what we need is essentially just this line 2 of this example code. I'm going to copy this over to our cloud page. Okay. And then I'm just going to paste that here. Then what I want to do is actually, I'm going to use this as an example. So to walk through what the final product or code would look like. So let me walk through what this code would look like. So using this example code, we've come up with our final product. So let's walk through that, right? So our first thing we needed to change is our data extension name right here. So our data extension is not birthday DE. We have our own data extension, which we declared our variable DE. So then we have the rows add function. And now we need to update the fields, our fields, to match our form fields. So our form fields are similar to this example code, right? We have our first name, we have our last name, we have email instead of email address, and then we have our company size and step. So step is going to be used to distinguish between this first form or if the submission came from the second form, so on the redirect forms. And then we're going to also need to update our field values. So as you can see in this example, they have hard-coded some of these are the field values. But what we're going to need to do is we're going to want the field values that are coming from the form. So, right, coming from our data extension. So for us to do that, we'll need to get the values of each field. And that's, again, where the get form field function is going to come into play again. So let's add those functions here. So if we add our functions, our fields, sorry. And we're going to want to do that before we're adding the data extension rows. And so we get this here. Let's apply source formatting so we get this nice and clean. So from lines 19 to 23, we're getting those field values, right? So what this is doing is we added a variable for each of our fields. And then we are using the get form field function to get the value from the data extension columns. And then, as I mentioned, for this form, we're going to be using our step field is going to be 1, since this is the first form that they will land on. So then now we have, since we already have our field, how we want to add the value. So this is what's coming after the colon here. So we're adding our first name, which is our first name variable, doing the same thing with last name, email, company size, and step. So now that we've got the fields and the values, this code should actually add data to our data extension. So let me just remove the example code. And let's save. Then we can publish. And we can test out if I submit the form, will data come into our data extension. Right. So even again, as I mentioned, there's no value coming in as our first load. So let's actually add data. This doesn't matter right now. So then let's submit. All right, and you can see again that value submitted is getting passed. So let's actually check our data extension. And here we go. Let's reload this. All right, so you'll see here that we've gotten our first submission, right? So that's working properly. And as I mentioned, this is our first form. We don't have these fields yet. And then it's populating as 1 since this was the first form submission. All right. So also just wanted to note here, ideally with these forms, we'd want to sanitize these values. So, check if data is there or if it's non-existent, email validation as well. But for the purpose of this session, it's not going to be included in our SSJS, but something to keep in mind. And another thing I wanted to mention is also maintenance issues. Let's go back to the cloud page right here. So for example, if you have a long form with 10 steps and each branch out to a different form or a couple of different questions, that'll add up fairly quickly, right? So that'll turn out to be a lot of forms. So if you're hard coding URLs, like we're doing here for this purpose, that's gonna and let's say at some point, you wanted to change one of those cloud pages, you'd have to, go back and change the URL in all 10 cloud pages. So not as efficient. So definitely best practice here is to have separate data extensions for each form URLs and then get from that. So for each step, you'd get the URL for that step form. So in that case, if you change the URL at any point, you just need to change the data extensions rather than having to change all the URLs in each cloud page. But again, for this purpose, the demos, we are hard coding just 2 URLs. But I wanted to, I definitely think it's worth mentioning for implementation of similar use cases. All right, so we've tested the data, we've submitted our data extension, we're seeing the data come in. So now we want to add in the logic of redirect, right? So that'll be actually another if condition. Let's go back down here. I'm actually going to remove this since we don't really need that anymore. That was just to help us ensure that the submission is working properly. Okay, so we're still working within our if statement, if block. And again, this is going to be another if condition. So what we want to check is the company size value. And then based on that, redirect them to either the small company URL or the large company URL. So let's see what that would look like, right? So let me grab that. If right here. Let's apply that source formatting. All right, so what this code right here from lines 27 to 30 is what we wrote is, right, so if our company size variable is less than 500, we want to redirect them to the small company form. And otherwise, redirect them to the large company form. At this point, the redirect logic will work, but if we think about the end-to-end process of how the customer is going to reach this form, they're going to reach this form through the CTA button within their email. In that email, there's a query string that's going to get appended to their URL. So if we just look at the email really quickly, let's say, our customer Timothy is clicking on the link. If you look at the URL, right, you're seeing, here's the query string getting appended to the URL. If we now need to get this query string also appended to our redirected URLs, right? The reason we need this query string appended to our small company URL and our large company URL is really because we need to find the primary key. So, our key identifier is that email address, and we need that query string to be able to pre-populate the existing values onto the second form. So it's identifying that it's the same user that was redirected to the second form. So with that said, the way this is written right now, it would just redirect you to the small company URL without that query string. So what we're going to do next is get the query string parameter and append it to our both URLs, so the small company URL and large company URL. So again, to save us some time, I have this set up, but we'll just walk through that really quickly. So let's get that in. I'm going to apply source formatting to get this clean. All right, so let's focus on lines 32 and 33 for now, but I'm sure everyone's noticed to try and catch variables as well, or statements as well. But so right here in line 32 and 33, what we did here is the logic that we're using to add the query string to our redirect URLs. So we have our variable that we declare as QS. We're using the get query string parameter function. So like I mentioned, the developer documentation is great for that. So if we look at what that function looks like, right? So it's pulls back a query string parameter based on our specified key. So as an example here, you'll see that we need that key value to identify the query string parameter. And then we're using the request.get query string parameter function here. So if we go back to our cloud page, and that's exactly what we're doing, right? So what we are pulling in our QS parameter and getting that query string parameter. In the next function, or the next line, we are using that redirect function. So if we go back to the developer documentation really quickly, you'll see here our redirect function. So it redirects a user from a landing page to another URL. Here's the syntax and the function properties, right? So if we go back to our cloud page, what we're doing is using that function, redirecting using our variable, right? So our redirect URL variable, and we're adding in the query string parameter right here. So what we're pretty much doing is recreating the format of the URL that Marketing Cloud automatically creates for us if we clicked on that email link. So right when we clicked on that email link, we saw the query string parameter appended to the cloud page URL. So also another function or statements that we've been using and what we're reviewing today are the try catch, right? So you can see that here in line 31 and 35. So what this try block is doing essentially, it's saying, hey, this code might throw an error, but let's try it. And if it does, let's catch the error. So that's where this line 35 and 36 are coming in. So what we're doing in this catch block here is we want to output it, output if there is an error to the front end of our page. So we can see, exactly what's going on, eliminate our, the process or our time to troubleshoot any code errors that we may be having. Since we already have this, error block printed here, we have an error variable. We can use that variable, and that's what we're doing here is we're setting that value to the error variable, and we're stringifying error. And the reason we're doing that is because error is also an object. So we're stringifying it before we output in the front end of our browser, right? So I did want to quickly jump to the deck just to show you what an error would display as using the try catch. So let me just jump here quickly. Oh, here. So as you can see, since we have that error, that's essentially our print place, right? So with an error, what you would get is once you click submit, you would get, a more detailed description of what's, what the error is. So instead of getting, a 500 error with, little to no context as to what the error actually is, you're getting a more description that'll hopefully help debug any issues. So that's, try catches are great for error handling within your SSJS code. especially within cloud pages, that makes it easier to, get a better explanation as to where the error is coming from. So let's jump back into the cloud page. So we've walked through the error submissions. We've walked through the submission scenario. Let's get back to the cloud page and write the rest of our logic. So I mentioned this earlier, but what we also need to check is if the user has any data in the data extension. So where we're going to start working on is in our else block. That's where we're going to add our logic to check if a user has data in their data extension. So let me just grab that code really quickly. And we will walk through those functions that we're using. Let me just apply the source formatting. Awesome. Okay. So let's go back down here. So the first thing we're looking at is we're setting this data variable. And we need to do a lookup, right? We're using that rows lookup function to check if they have any data in the data extension based on the email, right? So we're looking at the email column, return the first row of the email address. In our lookup, we're only getting one row because we're assuming that we only have one row of data associated to that email address. So if on line 40, right, we're going to start. So if the data has some value, so, if it's not null, we will redirect them to the small company URL or large company URL. So in line 41, we want to define our company size value, our variable. And then we first get that index, and then within that, we also want to get the actual company size value. This would return the first row of company size value. So similar to what we just went through in our if block, right? So we're doing this if the lines 27, it's essentially the same logic, right? So if company size is less than 500, redirect to small company URL. Otherwise, redirect to large company URL. And again, this is another example of a try-catch block, right? So when we were first building this code, we're not sure if, this code is going to, work. So let's see if there's an error. And this is why we also included this within a try-catch. But like I mentioned, this is the same logic as above. So we're getting the query string parameter and appending it to each redirect URL. And then generally try-catches, you can use it, just have one try-catch block and have all your code within that one block. If you have using more than one try-catch is fine. It's great for more precise error handling, right? So it's only really going to check this code that we have within the try block. So now that we have this form set up, right, we can actually move on to the second form. And the second form is very similar to this first form. Let's save this and publish. Let's go back. Looks like we might have an error. Oh, I think I have. Let's see here. I think I may have too many brackets. Let's actually take one out. Let's see if that helps. That's why copy and pasting is somewhat tough here, but let's check. All right, so yeah, it looked like I had too many brackets, so I just took one out. Let's publish that. All right, so this logic should be working, and let's get the logic into our small company form and large company form. Then we can actually start doing an end-to-end testing to see how the the flow is working, right? All right, so if we go to the second cloud page, so we're going to start with the small company. And like I mentioned, the form's extremely similar, right? So we're just having this additional field that needs to be answered for small companies. And let's look at the logic. It's also very similar to the first one, right? So we're at this point, we're assuming for this use case that the customer, has data in the data extension prior to getting to this page. So we don't need to, so we have some of those same variables that we were using in our first form, right? So you can see all of this lines 11 through 18. We are declaring those variables and we're starting our if condition again, based on the submitted value. But we don't need to save any of those prior form fields. We only really need to save the new fields, right? So which is our country field here on line 19. And then first step, we changed the value from 1 to 2, since this will be the second form that's getting, submitted. Instead of the, in our first form, we used the rows add, we're actually going to do the rows update. So this data extension sub-object function here will update our data extension with our new fields, right? So we're seeing our country. So this is, set up in a similar way, right? So we're getting our country value and our step value, and we're updating the customer's data in the data extension. We need to use, we're pulling in their email and our sub email, right? So that'll help us, that's going to identify which row to update and match on the user's email. In line 25 here, we're going to use our debug print place right here to have a simple confirmation message. So once the form submitted, we'll see a form submitted message. In our else block, we want to get these prior fields pre-populated. So if I jump here to our form, here you'll see here, right? So we have our fields, our prior form fields disabled. So there's no way of editing, the user has no way of editing these fields, as it's going to be pre-populated with what they just submitted. The only way to edit these fields are, as you can see here, through our AMScript variables that we have declared right here. But again, that's not accessible to our end user. So that's what we're looking at from lines, 28. So in line 28, we first need to declare our variable, right? Our data variable. And we're going to perform a rows lookup to where we're setting each field value to return the first row for each field, right? So we're looking at, based on the email match, we're going to update the values for our fields based on what's in the data extension. So we have that set up, right? So let's now look at our large form, which will actually be extremely similar. And I know we have about 13 minutes left, so we should have enough time to walk through the end-to-end solution. But let's look at what our second form, our large company form, would look like. So this is just a small company. And it's really the same logic, right? Let's go here. So you can see we assume that there's some data. The only difference really here is the company's size. So that's all set, right? Let me just show you the differences here, right? So within our large form, we're asking an additional question. So we want to ask the country as well, but we also want to ask the company type. So let's go back to the code snippet. And what we're doing on line 19 and 20 is exactly what we've done, before. We're getting that form field, that value for our country field and our company type. We're also, for our is public field, this is a Boolean field. So we're looking at it with the company type value, it's either going to be true. The public is either going to be true or false. And then our step value is, our step variable will be the same, right? So this is still the second form that they'll submit. So we'll keep that as 2. And similarly with our rows update function, we have included the same fields that we did in our small form, but we also included our new additional field, which is public. And then similarly, we have our, like here on line 27, we have our form submission confirmation message. And then these are, as mentioned in our small company form, these are the pre-populated values that will be pre-populated once the user gets redirected to this page. Okay, so we have this all set up. Let's schedule and publish this. We can actually, let's try to submit this form end to end for both small and large companies, and let's see it in action. All right. So let me just X out of here. Let me clear this data so we can start over. All right, so we have 0. Okay, so let's start from, all right, so our subscriber, Timothy, has received this email and he's going to start filling out this form. So we're going to first start with a small company and then we'll redo the process with a large company. So if we click our button here, you'll see again, I'll call out. So from the CTA button that our Marketing Cloud automatically creates from us, you can see that our query string parameter in the URL is getting appended. You'll see that our debug and error consoles are blank, which is great. We don't have a form submission, right? All right, so if we were to fill this out with Tim, so Tim Sider, and again, since our logic is based off of our, our key identifier for this use case is the email. We've added his email and we're going to do a small company. So once we hit submit, you'll see that here's the data that's getting passed. All right. So we've outputted this, the data that he passed into. Now let's check our data extension to see if that data passed into the data extension. All right. So here we go. Let's just refresh this. All right, so we have one form. Awesome. So, right, we'll see his inputted data. And like I said, this step is getting populated with 1 since he populated that first form. So if we go back to the cloud page, you'll see it automatically redirected us to that small form. Again, you'll see that our query string, the same query string, is getting appended to our URL, and that's because we want to identify that it's the same user and we want to pre-populate it with their data. So you'll see that Tim's data is already populated and we have no option to edit that, but we want to add in our new input fields, right? So we want to choose a country. We'll choose USA. We'll click submit. Right, awesome. So we get our form submitted confirmation message, and let's just check if we get that data passed into the data extension and make sure it updated with the proper information. Great. So as you can see here, we've gotten our country, and then our step column also updated to 2. So that's because we submitted that second form, and that's what we declare that variable to set the value as. So the small company looks like it's working awesome. Great. Let's try with the large company. So let me X out of here. Let me clear this data again with Tim. And let's go back to the email. So Tim receives his email. He's now a large company customer. So we're going to add his data. We're going to make it larger than 500. So we submit. Great. This is perfect. So you'll see here our query string parameter is still getting appended. We've been redirected to that large form. You'll see that this is our data that's coming in. And our data has also been pre-populated from that first step. And now we can input our 2 new fields. So we can do Mexico and we can do public. But before I submit, let's check to make sure that that data got added to our data extension. Great. So here you go. You can see here's his large company size, step 1. So let's go submit that second form and hopefully our data gets updated. So we'll submit this. You'll see our confirmation message form was submitted. Let's go check that data extension. Perfect. So now we have our country. It was updated on the correct row, Mexico, and it was a public company. So we set that public as true. And then our step 2 got updated as well from 1. So something that, I think is very much worth mentioning is that we didn't have a chance to cover in this session is error handling. So within your SSJS code, there's a lot of, within this code that we built, there's a lot of error handling to be done. So, for example, what happens if the same person tries to submit multiple times? So those types of scenarios should definitely be covered within your error handling. But as you can see here, we built a multi-form page and redirected them to a different form based on their answers. So again, SSJS is really powerful in terms of being able to access your data, manipulate the data, add data to a data extension, and also get those values. So I hope this was extremely helpful. I don't think we have enough time to walk through the other functions that I wanted to walk through. JB, I'm not sure if there's any questions from me to answer as well.
Oh, that was a great session, Michelle. I know you did a lot of work, prep work. Thank you very much for all the information. Checking for the answers, but I don't see any as of now. So
Okay.
anybody has any questions, please post them in the chat window.
Awesome. And if there isn't any, we can actually use the last 5 minutes to walk through the other functions. I just wanted to leave some time for questions, but I can just walk through these.
Please go ahead, Michelle.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So the send function. So the send function allows you to access and control how emails are sent via Marketing Cloud. So the add function adds a new send to your Marketing Cloud account, and then it returns the status of the send's creation. A cancel send function attempts to cancel a currently existing send. And then the remove function removes an initialized send. And then the retrieve function retrieves a send based on the specified criteria. And finally, the retrieve list function retrieves information regarding which list or lists were targeted by the send event. So if we go to the next here, the send definition. The send definition it's a sub object. So it allows you to control email send definitions with those associated functions like add, update, retrieve, remove. So for our first example here is the definition add function, and that adds a send definition. The add with DE function adds a send definition that incorporates a sendable data extension. And that's similarly with the definition on your right here now, the definition add with filter definition function. So this function adds a send definition that incorporates a filter definition. The remove function removes a previously initialized send definition, and it returns that status of the removal. And then the definition retrieve function retrieves send definitions based on the specified criteria. And then the definition send function sends emails to the lists associated with the initialized send definition. And finally, the definition update function updates the send definition and returns that status. And lastly, not least, is our query definition function. So these functions allow you to manipulate queries via SSJS. So you can create, retrieve, update, delete, run. You have those functions that are able to manipulate any of those, any queries within your account through SSJS. So the add function adds a new query definition to your account. Similarly, so a perform function would perform that query definition. On your right, the remove function removes a query definition. And, similarly, the retrieve function, it'll retrieve an array of query definitions that's based on the specified criteria within that function. And then the update function updates a query definition and returns that status of okay, or it returns an error message. So I know we're almost at time, so just wanted to give you a quick recap of what we worked on today. So we walked through the DE functions. We used the rows add, rows update, rows lookup, the try catch block. We used if conditions to build that multi-form page, add data to the data extension, and also update the customer's data while also redirecting them to that second form. So we also went through the send functions, the send definition functions, and query definition functions. Thank you all for your time. Happy to answer any questions, and we can even answer them through the Slack channel if needed, or connect with me on LinkedIn. But yeah, JB, I'm not sure if you wanted to cover anything else.
That's awesome, Michelle. So any questions after the session, post them on the Slack channel. So we do have a dedicated SSJS Bootcamp and Challenges channel for this one. And I do see one question coming up, Michelle. Can these functions apply to an use case of putting email click activities into a DE that can be used in a journey to send follow-up email based on which link is clicked on the email?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just, thinking through it right now, it seems like you would be able to use that function for email click activity. You would have to likely, or a way to use it would within a journey would maybe use to wait until API event to automatically trigger that journey or those users into the journey. But yeah, you should be able to.
Great. I don't see any other questions, Michelle. I think we can call it a wrap. So this is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. If anyone wants to go back and rewatch the session, it will be there on the YouTube channel in C Learning Camp. And we hope to see you again tomorrow for the hands-on session. And the next bootcamp session will be on Wednesday, same time, 12 p.m. So you can find all the links, all the registration links on the Baby event page. Search for the Salesforce Marketers Group Phoenix, and then you can find all the events. Thank again, everyone, for joining, and thank you, Michelle, for the wonderful session.
Thanks, JB. Thank you all.
Have a good one. Bye.
Good one. Bye-bye.